Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome to Adasina's inaugural quarterly briefing, our investor briefing for Q1 2024. This is being presented live on Tuesday, March 19th, 2024. In this inaugural briefing, we will share a retrospective of our first 3 years of community-centered public markets impact asset management. Our speakers today are Rachel J. Robasciotti, CEO, founder, and lead portfolio manager. Rachel will cover our investment thesis and performance. And Renee Morgan, Director, Social Justice, who will cover impact performance highlights. At the conclusion of the briefing, we will also have a Q&A session with Rachel and Renee, in which we will answer questions both submitted in advance and submitted live. So let's dive in, please. We'll start off with Rachel. And again, Rachel is CEO, founder, and lead portfolio manager for Adasina Social Capital. Rachel, the mic is yours.
Thank you, Julianne. I'm so happy to be here with our community. So before we jump into the specifics, I want to just set the stage with a brief overview of Adasina, our investment thesis, and our theory of change. Adasina is a public markets impact asset manager. We're very proud to be majority owned and operated by women, people of color, and members of the LGBTQ+ community. And as you can see here, we serve as a bridge between public markets and social justice movements. We do that in a couple of ways. We partner with the communities that are impacted by social justice issues, and then we mobilize investors who can make a difference with their investment dollars. And by working with us, investors can both have an impact with the assets in their portfolio and help drive long-term systemic change. We're so happy if you're already investing with us, and we'll be giving you all of the information you might need to increase that investment over time and engage with us more deeply. I want to go into our investment thesis first by sharing that we really believe that social justice movements provide investors with early indicators of risk in public markets. And we do believe that social justice metrics are very useful for assessing long-term corporate profitability. And most of all, what investors want are sustainable long-term returns. And those are actually achieved by investing in sustainable companies for the long term. So I just want to start here by giving you a couple of examples. You can see the oil and gas sector in the S&P 500 during the period of time shown decreased by 27%. And this was aligned with global divestment calls for divestment from fossil fuels. Similarly, there were widespread calls for divestment from the mass incarceration system. CoreCivic, being a private prison company, over this 2-year period saw, as that was happening, a decrease in net income of almost 200%. So we're really seeing that there are ways that social justice movements can provide us with early indicators of risk. But we're not just doing this because it makes investment sense. As any of you know who have been in our community, we also have a very deep theory of change that I want to share with you before I go into the investment highlights. This is the most simplified version that we could show you of our theory of change. Biggest picture, we're leveraging our power in the public markets to advance movements for racial, gender, economic, and climate justice. And we do that by partnering with the social justice movements to identify the truly impactful metrics. We get insights from them. We prove social justice metrics are investable by being the first asset manager to invest. By applying these metrics in our own investment products, we actually show that it is possible to invest along the lines of these social justice metrics. And we mobilize investors to act collectively and in solidarity with social justice movements to have large-scale systemic impact. And I know that many of you here today have been part of our investor coalitions and many other actions that we've asked investors to join us in taking to really make more of the world that we want.
Thank you, Rachel. And as promised, next up is Renee Morgan, our Director of Social Justice, to share some highlights from our social justice impact over the past 3 years. Renee, please take the mic.
Hi all. I can hear like this collective, finally, through the crowd. A lot of you I meet with quarterly, and I know you've been wanting an impact report. So super excited and thrilled to say you're getting one. And we are, and so I have the pleasure of trying to let you know all the things that we've done in the past 3 years, and even dating a little further back, in 15 minutes or less. So in the interest of time, I want to point out that I'm going to like go over some big highlights. And when you get the report, there are like large bodies of work, working groups, reports that are like adjacent to all of the work that I'm going to point out now, and you will be able to see that. Before I get started, I'm going to highlight the work that we've done, because we talk about our work in terms of pillars of justice. As Rachel mentioned, it's racial justice, gender justice, climate justice, and economic justice. And I want to acknowledge that we know that these are not siloed. You cannot talk about racial justice without talking about gender justice. You can't talk about gender justice without talking about economic justice. You can't talk about economic justice without talking about climate justice. So we are aware of that, and until we have better language to acknowledge that, we lead with these what we're calling pillars of justice, because it's a language people understand. So when I say that, I am acknowledging that there's intersectionality in all of the things that we do. So I thought I would do this in a linear way. So journey back with me to about the year 2017 and 2018. And at the time, the Me Too movement was happening. And I'm sorry, I have a little throat thing. So in 2017 and 2018, really, there was the Me Too movement was happening culturally. And what became Adasina had launched its first formal campaign under gender justice pillar, and that was to end forced arbitration. Our partners in that campaign were really have like the partners that we've been partnering with over the past 3 or 4 years when it comes to gender work were Ultraviolet, Ledbetter, and Grab Your Wallet. And so what we heard from the community was to put a focus on workplace violence. And so we did. And so we partnered with those folks to say, okay, we understand we have to start somewhere, and forced arbitration was the place to start. And so some of the growth that you can see in that movement is here on this slide. I'm not going to read the slides. I just want to tell you the story, and you can kind of get the data. And once you get the report, you'll have all that data with you as well. So we had a big success in this. Ultimately, that ended with federal policy banning forced arbitration nationally. Similar to gender justice, and like I said, I'm going to go really fast because I want to get to your questions. But similar to gender justice, racial justice for us started prior to the formal launch of Adasina. Both Rachel and I had been in this investing space as advisors and managers prior to Adasina. We both had been working in racial. You can just flip to the racial justice slide. We both had been doing a lot of work in racial justice prior to the formal launch of Adasina. So what you're seeing on this slide, and just to like highlight some of our work, is I was one of the founders of the Racial Justice Investing Coalition, which actually dates back to 2016. And then when I joined formally with Adasina, I continued that work with Adasina. And I don't know if y'all remember 2020, not too much happened that year. But along with the global pandemic, it was the year I started at Adasina. But most importantly for what we're talking about today is there's a racial justice uprising in the summer of 2020. And we, again, had not formally launched Adasina to the fall, but all of the pieces were in place to launch that under the company before. And so investors were scrambling. What do we do? What do we do? What do we do about racial justice? And again, Rachel and I, independently and simultaneously, had been doing this work for years. And so Rachel decided to release our investor data set so that investors had something to do. They had a place to go and they had a place to look. You can see it was highlighted in the New York Times. And that really put us on the map. And so I want to highlight racial justice just in a bunch of different ways, because that's the work we're probably most known for. So it started in 2020 with the release of the data set, which was really brought on by social circumstances and what was happening in the world. Our focus is on ending mass incarceration in-house. And so we've done that in a couple of different ways. One is we partnered with the investor Circle Towards Decarceration. And we did, as you see, stop the first prison bond failure. There was a bond after all of these banks and all of these investment firms said that they weren't going to fund public prisons. A couple of the big banks did try to fund private prisons through a bond rather than stock. And so through our friends in the industry and coalitions that we were part of, we got wind of that information, and with their help, we're able to stop that. Our partners in racial justice, most directly when we're working with Adasina, tend to be the Movement for Black Lives and SEIU when we're talking about prison bonds. Within the coalition work of the Investors Towards Decarceration, they have been really localized, really deep grassroots organizers in Alabama and Georgia. So I just want to lift up their work. Sorry, I'm really struggling with this throat thing. Okay, next we're going to go to economic justice. So that kind of brings us current. So Adasina was formally launched then in 2020, and all of that work continues to happen with gender and racial justice in Adasina. What had happened in our first campaign that we formally were going to launch is the sub-minimum wage campaign. And so we went live with the ending the sub-minimum wage campaign in the fall of 2020. We released a data set. We started the investor letter. Our partner in that is One Fair Wage. It's been a great partnership. I want to point out something that compares to forced arbitration. When we started with the forced arbitration campaign, when we contacted companies and as we move forward in that campaign, due to lots of pressure and some of the work that we were doing, companies were getting rid of forced arbitration pretty steadily until I think it started with just a couple companies, and at the end with federal legislation there was about 3,000 or something like that. The private markets, when we started this campaign, I think there were just 30 or 40 companies that were paying a living wage or ending the sub-minimum wage, and now again there's about 5,000 companies. We are still addressing that and reaching out to the companies themselves across the board. But one of the things that I will say is this is having massive success in the ballot box. One Fair Wage shifted gears and started looking at a 25-state strategy to tackle ending the sub-minimum wage regionally and at the state level. And quite literally every time it's been on the ballot, it's won. I'm going to make a prediction here, don't quote me, but I think this is going to end with federal policy. I think that ending the sub-minimum wage is going to go the way of forced arbitration. So we are still working on this campaign and work closely with One Fair Wage. Finally, that brings us to 2022 and our climate justice. Boom, boom, boom. Thanks. Climate justice campaign. We started in 2019. Our partners in that are the ETC group and Friends of the Earth. This is when we talk about forced arbitration or sub-minimum wage, those are things that companies can do within their business practice, but doesn't address their main business. When we talk about ending mass incarceration or looking at the food system and getting rid of extractive agriculture practices and harmful practices to people and planet, that is a much bigger lift and ask. And so this campaign has taken longer to launch. It is we published the report, ETC published the report that we helped make happen at the end of 2022. It started in 2021, it ended in 2022. It's a great report. And we have been building coalitions. In fact, last week I was in Maryland with climate justice and food justice people from all over the world, really trying to look at the food systems and extractive agriculture. So as far as I know, we have published the first ever investor data set around extractive agriculture and looking at this food system. I encourage you all to go to bridgejustice.org. All of our data sets are published at bridgejustice.org. And those are all the data sets that we have worked with in conjunction with our social justice partners. And then all of them are also within our portfolio. And I think that concludes all the information in the highlights of each campaign over the past now 3 to 5-ish years. Again, you will be getting the impact report, which will go into much greater detail about all of these and then all of the adjacent work that's gone along with it. Calls to action: if you haven't signed the investor statement in support of ending the sub-minimum wage, that is here linked, and we will be forming a larger coalition for extractive agriculture, and please join our mailing list. You can reach out to me. You see that social justice at Adasina. That comes to my team and I, and we will bring you in and we'll start, changing the system together. Yeah, I think that's it.
Thank you, Renee. And we have now covered highlights. We are really grateful to all of you for joining us for these highlights. We thank you for joining us, whether live or via recording. And this concludes the prepared remarks for our Q1 2024 briefing. We are very, very excited to continue the conversation with you and provide additional resources, which we hope will serve to help you align your portfolio to reflect social justice values and drive long-term impact. As Rachel and Renee both mentioned, we will be sending out additional resources over the next couple of weeks to provide you substantially greater detail to back up these highlights we've shared. And that will include the set of calls to action Renee just walked through, as well as the ones Rachel provided. We also really do encourage you, if you have not already, to subscribe to our mailing list to ensure that you receive updates and further information that's not explicitly tied to this event. We also really value your feedback about this and about all of the materials we share and of all of our communications and all of our activities in the market and in social justice activities. So we encourage you to reach out to us at all of the addresses we've shared: invest at Adasina, events at Adasina, social justice at Adasina, to share with us those comments, questions, and suggestions. And if you have additional questions that don't get addressed during this briefing or that you don't think to share during this briefing, please do follow up with those. If you have only one takeaway from today's briefing, I hope it is this: that together we can become unstoppable agents of meaningful change for people and planet.